The alien market was alive with noise and light. Strange creatures walked between stalls, their voices sharp and cruel. Banners of gold and silver hung from the high ceiling, glittering in the glow of red lamps. Weapons, jewels, and cages filled with prisoners were displayed like trophies. The air smelled of smoke and metal, heavy and suffocating. Among the crowd, one human stood alone. His name was Daniel, a wanderer lost in a galaxy that never welcomed his kind. He had no riches, no weapons, not even a piece of cloth worth trading. His hands were empty, and that emptiness became the target of every cruel laugh. "Look at the human," one alien hissed, its mouth filled with sharp teeth. "Empty-handed, weak, useless," another growled, its eyes glowing red. Daniel lowered his gaze, but he did not move. He felt the stares on his back like fire, but he stood in silence. Inside his chest, his heart beat steady, reminding him of the reason he endured. At the far end of the hall, a stage rose above the crowd. Guards dragged forward a figure bound in chains. It was a girl, not human, yet strangely familiar in her suffering. Her skin glowed faintly under the lights, marked with lines of silver. Her hair flowed down like rivers of night, and her eyes, though filled with fear, still burned with strength. The auctioneer's voice cut through the air. "Behold, the rarest prize of this cycle, the girl of the silver line, dangerous, powerful, and yours to command." The crowd roared, their voices eager, their hands raising shining stones and weapons as offers. Daniel's breath caught when the girl lifted her eyes. For a single heartbeat, their gazes locked. The noise of the hall faded away, leaving only silence between them. Her eyes pleaded without words. Daniel felt a pull deep inside, something stronger than fear. He did not know her name, her story, or her power, but in that moment, he knew she should not be here, chained and broken. Something inside him whispered, "Save her." The aliens mocked him louder as the bidding began. "Empty hands cannot buy queen," one spat. "Stay silent, human, before you are crushed." Another jeered. Daniel clenched his fists, feeling the sting of their words. He looked down at his hands, bare and calloused, yet not useless. They had carried him through war, through loss, through survival. They may be empty now, but they had never been without strength. The auctioneer called out numbers, each bid higher than the last. The girl's price rose like fire, and still Daniel said nothing. He stood at the edge of the stage, quiet, watching. The crowd thought his silence was weakness, but inside his thoughts were sharp. He remembered the faces of his family lost in the war, the people he could not save. The weight of failure pressed on him, but this time he would not walk away. The girl's chains rattled as she stumbled. The guards pulled her roughly, and she winced in pain. Daniel took one step forward, his jaw set. The laughter rose again, mocking his courage. "What will you do, human?" they taunted. "Show us your empty hands again." He ignored them, his eyes fixed only on her. In that single connection, he found a reason to stand tall. Perhaps he had nothing to offer, but his heart was not empty. And sometimes, a heart filled with fire weighed more than gold. The bidding slowed, and silence spread through the hall. Every eye turned to Daniel, waiting to see what he would do. He inhaled deeply, his chest rising as if to prepare for battle. This was no battlefield of guns and steel, but of courage and choice. And Daniel knew what he would give. The girl blinked at him, her lips parting as if to speak. But no sound came, only the faint tremble of hope in her gaze. Daniel stood beneath the bright alien lamps, surrounded by enemies. He had no wealth, no power, no allies. Yet he carried the one thing they could not understand, the will to sacrifice. As the guards pulled the girl back toward the stage, Daniel's voice finally rose, calm but unshakable. The crowd stilled, the laughter died for a breath. For the first time, the human spoke, and though his words were simple, they carried weight like a hammer. "I may have empty hands," Daniel said, his eyes never leaving the girl, "but I will not stand empty in spirit." The market froze. The girl's chains glimmered in the light as her chest rose with sudden hope. The auctioneer's smile faltered, sensing something different in this human. The silence was heavy, ready to shatter with the next choice. Daniel's hands may have been bare, but his heart was ready, and every eye in that hall knew something was about to change. The silence in the alien market did not last long. The moment Daniel's words faded into the heavy air, the crowd erupted with laughter. It was cruel, sharp, and merciless, echoing off the metal walls like thunder. Dozens of alien voices mixed together, each mocking the human who dared to speak. "Did you hear that?" One alien hissed, clutching its long belly as it laughed. "He thinks spirit can buy a slave." Another cackled, its forked tongue flicking in amusement. From the balconies above, alien nobles leaned forward, their jeweled robes glittering, their cruel smiles wide. They whispered to each other, as if the humans' bold words were a circus act meant to entertain. Daniel stood in the center of the storm, his jaw tight, his fists clenched. Their laughter stabbed at him, but he did not lower his head. He had known this sound before, the laughter of soldiers who mocked him when he had nothing left, the laughter of enemies who thought humanity was weak. The same sound haunted him in the ruins of his home world. But he had survived it once, and he would survive it again. The auctioneer banged a metal staff against the stage, his booming voice cutting through the noise. "Silence, silence. The human may speak, but words are not currency here." His eyes, black and cold, narrowed on Daniel. "Unless you bring wealth, your voice is worth nothing." The crowd cheered at the words, their laughter rising again. Daniel ignored them, his gaze fixed only on the chained girl. She stood trembling, her silver-marked skin glowing faintly as she looked at him. Her lips parted slightly, as though she wished to speak but dared not. The guards at her side shoved her forward again, rattling her chains. Her eyes never left Daniel's face, and in them he saw a spark that made him stand taller. The bidding continued, voices rising with greed. 5 blood crystals, one alien shouted, raising a glowing stone that pulsed with inner fire. 10 plasma rifles. Another roared, its armored hands holding up a weapon capable of destroying cities. Weapons, jewels, treasures beyond human imagination filled the air. Each bid was louder, stronger, more impossible than the last. The crowd's jeers turned to smug smiles as they displayed their wealth. "Look at the human now," one sneered. "Empty hands while kings bid with empires." Daniel's throat was dry, but his resolve did not break. He stepped forward once more, earning another round of mocking laughter. The auctioneer raised a brow, amused. "And what do you offer, human?" The words rolled like venom, daring him to humiliate himself again. Daniel's voice was steady, though his chest felt heavy. He spoke not to the auctioneer, not to the crowd, but to the girl. "I offer what none of you can, my life." The market went silent again, but this silence was different. It was not disbelief alone. It was fear mixed with confusion. Even the aliens, who prided themselves on cruelty, faltered at such madness. The girl's eyes widened, her breath catching in her chest. Her chains shook as she leaned forward, as though his words had broken something inside her. The crowd erupted again, but this time their laughter was uneasy. Madness. One alien barked, its voice trembling. "Human lives are worthless." Another spat, but its eyes darted nervously. The nobles whispered louder, trying to understand what kind of creature would make such an offer. The auctioneer's smirk returned, though smaller than before. "Your life?" He repeated slowly, savoring the words. He leaned forward, staring at Daniel as if trying to see through him. "What value has your life, human? What power do you carry? You own nothing. You are nothing." Daniel stood unmoving, the chains of the girl reflecting in his steady eyes. He did not flinch, did not falter. "My life is worth her freedom," he said, his voice like steel. "If you take it, then I pay with everything I am." The crowd was restless now, their laughter breaking into sharp whispers. For a moment, It seemed the entire market trembled with the weight of his words. The girl's chest rose quickly, her eyes wide with both fear and wonder. For the first time since she had been dragged in chains, hope flickered across her face. The auctioneer leaned back slowly, his staff tapping against the stage. "Interesting," he murmured, "very interesting." Around him, the bidders shouted again, but this time their offers sounded hollow. The shine of their jewels dimmed. The weight of their weapons felt less impressive. For none of them could match what the human had just placed on the table, his very existence. Daniel's hands were still empty, but in that emptiness he held something the aliens could not understand: the courage to give himself away. The mockery of the crowd had turned into uneasy silence once more. And in that silence, Daniel knew the battle for her freedom had just begun. The alien crowd buzzed with whispers, their earlier laughter now broken into nervous murmurs. Daniel's offer still hung in the air like smoke after a fire. Some aliens sneered, some shook their heads, and others stared at him with curiosity they had never given a human before. The auctioneer tapped his staff against the stage again, his sharp grin showing teeth that gleamed under the lamps. "A bold promise," he said, his voice thick with mockery, "but promises do not weigh in gold." The girl in chains lifted her head, her silver-marked skin catching the red glow of the lamps. For the first time since her capture, her eyes were not empty. They fixed on Daniel, searching him, testing him, as if she wished to know if he truly meant those words. When his gaze met hers, the noise of the market seemed to fade again. In that stillness, something passed between them, something invisible but strong. It was not wealth, not power, but a connection that no one else could see. Daniel remembered his past in fragments, his family, his friends, all gone. He remembered nights spent staring at the sky, wondering why he had survived when so many others had not. That question had followed him like a shadow. Now, as he looked at her, he thought maybe the answer was here, in this moment. Maybe he had lived only to stand before her chains. The guards shoved the girl again, forcing her closer to the stage's edge. She stumbled, the chains biting into her wrists, but she did not break eye contact with him. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to speak. No sound came out, but Daniel read the message in her trembling gaze. "Help me," it said. "Please help me." The crowd roared with more bids, trying to drown the human's voice with numbers and treasures. 20 plasma grenades, one shouted. 2 ships filled with slaves, another bellowed. The offers filled the hall, shaking the air with greed. Yet Daniel barely heard them, his mind locked on the girl's silent cry. Inside his chest, a storm raged. He thought of his failures, of every person he could not protect. He remembered standing on battlefields where the strong always crushed the weak. He remembered feeling powerless, just as he did now, with empty hands. But this time he swore he would not step aside. This time he would fight with the only thing he had left, himself. The auctioneer raised his staff again, his grin stretching wider. "Still the human remains. Still he does not leave. Do you think your life is worth more than theirs?" he mocked, gesturing to the bidders. The crowd howled with laughter, though it was thinner now, weaker. Daniel stepped forward, ignoring the noise, his voice low but steady. "I do not think," he said. "I know." The girl's eyes widened at those words. Her body trembled, not from fear, but from something new, hope. She had been dragged across worlds, traded like an object, stripped of dignity and freedom. For so long she had believed no one would see her as more than a prize. Yet here stood a human, empty-handed, offering his very soul. Her breath quickened as she realized he was serious, deadly serious. The guards noticed the way she looked at him and snarled, pulling her back roughly. But she resisted, her chains clanging as she tried to stand closer. One guard struck her across the face, a sharp blow that echoed through the hall. Daniel's chest burned with rage, his fists trembling at his sides. The crowd laughed again, amused by the cruelty. But Daniel did not laugh. His voice cut through the noise, sharp as steel. "Enough, he growled, his eyes blazing. The hall quieted for a moment, surprised at the force in his voice. The guard sneered, but did not strike her again. Even the auctioneer tilted his head, curious. There was something in the human's tone that unsettled them. It was not the sound of wealth or power, but of resolve. And in a place built on greed and control, such resolve was rare. The girl lifted her head again, blood on her lip, but her eyes brighter than before. For the first time, she did not look like a prisoner. She looked like someone waiting for a chance to rise. Daniel's chest tightened as he realized she was stronger than even she believed. All she needed was someone to stand for her, to remind her she was worth saving. The bidding slowed, the crowd restless, their jeers growing uneasy. The alien nobles whispered among themselves, glancing at the girl and then at the human. This was no longer just an auction. It was becoming something else, something dangerous. The auctioneer's smile faltered for the first time. He tapped his staff and spoke again, though his voice carried less certainty. Human, you claim your life is worth her freedom, but if you're taken, you will never rise again. Do you still stand by your offer? Daniel's answer came without hesitation. Yes, he said simply, his voice echoing in the silence. The girl's chains rattled as she leaned forward, her lips trembling. For the first time, a sound escaped her, soft and broken, but filled with meaning. Why? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Daniel met her gaze and spoke the truth that burned inside him. Because no one else will, and someone must. The hall was silent once more. The crowd that had mocked him now watched with uneasy eyes. The girl who had been a prize now stood as something more, someone who mattered, and the human who had nothing now stood taller than kings. In that moment, between the chains and the empty hands, the first bond was forged, and both of them knew, though the battle had only begun, neither of them would face it alone. The market grew restless as the human's words settled into the air like heavy chains. Daniel's offer had turned the hall upside down, the easy laughter of the aliens fading into murmurs of doubt. The auctioneer stood at the center of it all, his dark eyes narrowing as he tapped his staff against the stage. Very well, he said slowly, his voice sharp as a blade. If you wish to play this game, human, then let the bidding continue. The crowd roared in approval, though their cheers were uneasy. The alien bidders raised their treasures higher, determined to prove their wealth against the mad human who thought life alone could buy freedom. 30 blood crystals, one shouted, its claws clinking against a chest of glowing red stones. 50 plasma rifles, another bellowed, its armor shining as it lifted weapons that could wipe out armies. An entire slave ship, came another voice, cruel and proud. The hall thundered with their offers, greed dripping from every word. Daniel stood unmoving, his chest tight, his throat dry. He had no numbers, no stones, no ships, nothing that could be measured beside such treasures. But when his gaze met the girl's once more, the fear in her eyes burned into him. She was more than a prize, more than a weapon, more than what they saw on her chains. And he knew, with certainty, that no number, no treasure could weigh against a single life. The auctioneer smirked, lifting his staff again. Do you see, human? He mocked. The galaxy bids with power, and you bid with nothing. The crowd laughed, but weaker now, unsure if they should mock or watch. Daniel took a step forward, his voice rising above the noise. I bid what none of you can. I bid my life, and my life is worth more than all your gold because it is the only thing I own. The girl's breath caught, her silver-marked skin glowing faintly under the lamps. She trembled, but it was not only from fear. It was from the weight of his words pressing into her heart. She had been sold, traded, caged, yet never had anyone looked at her as he did now. For the first time in years, she felt seen, and that feeling shook her more than chains ever had. The guards shifted uneasily, their grips tightening on their weapons. Even they could feel the shift in the air, the strange pull around the human and the chain girl. It was not wealth, not force, but something stronger, something the galaxy had long forgotten: sacrifice. The auctioneer banged his staff once more, his voice booming. Very well. If the human wishes to trade life for freedom, then let us see if his courage survives the fire. His grin widened, sharp and cruel. Guards, test him. Two massive aliens stepped forward, armored like beasts of war. They moved through the crowd, pushing aside bidders as they advanced toward Daniel. The hall erupted in cheers and laughter again, the spectacle growing. The human would be crushed, they thought, torn apart before the girl's eyes. This was entertainment now, cruel and bloody entertainment. Daniel's hands trembled, but not from fear. His body remembered battle, remembered pain, remembered the sound of war that had once destroyed his home. He had survived before, and he would again. As the guards drew closer, his eyes never left the girl. Her gaze locked with his, wide and desperate, and in that gaze he found his strength. The first guard swung a heavy weapon, its blade glowing with heat. Daniel ducked, the strike missing his head by inches, sparks showering as the blade struck metal. The crowd roared, their voices shaking the market. The second guard lunged, claws outstretched, but Daniel rolled aside, his body moving with the memory of countless battles. He rose to his feet, fists clenched, his heart burning like fire. The girl gasped, her chains rattling as she pulled against them. Her lips moved in silent words, urging him to stand, to fight, to live. Daniel struck back, his fist colliding with the armored guard's jaw. The sound was like thunder, the guard staggering back, shocked that a human's blow could carry such weight. The crowd's laughter faltered, surprise flickering in their eyes. The auctioneer's grin faded slightly, his staff lowering as he leaned forward, watching closely. This human was not weak, not broken, not like the others he had sold before. Something in him was different, dangerous, unpredictable. The second guard charged again, rage in its eyes, but Daniel did not retreat. He stepped into the attack, his fist striking the beast's throat. The guard collapsed with a choking roar, falling to the ground with a crash. The hall fell silent for a breath. No one laughed now, no one mocked. The chained girl's eyes widened with shock, her chest rising fast. She had known he was brave, but she had not expected this. The human who stood empty-handed had just knocked down monsters twice his size. Daniel breathed heavily, his body aching, but he stood tall. His gaze swept across the hall, meeting the eyes of every alien that had mocked him. "I may have nothing," he said, his voice low but carrying like thunder. "But nothing is enough when it is given freely." The silence broke into chaos, voices shouting, arguing, some furious, some afraid. The auctioneer's staff slammed against the stage, silencing them again. His grin returned, though thinner now. "Impressive," he admitted, "but strength alone does not win freedom." He gestured toward the chained girl, her silver lines glowing brighter than ever. "Will you still offer your life, human, even if it means never seeing her free?" Daniel's chest rose and fell, his breath sharp, his body heavy with pain. But his answer came without hesitation, clear and unwavering. "Yes," he said, "because her freedom is worth more than mine." The girl's eyes filled with tears that glimmered like silver under the lights. Her lips trembled, and for the first time, she spoke louder, her voice breaking through the silence. "Why?" she cried, her voice shaking. Daniel looked at her, and in his answer, the hall itself seemed to tremble. "Because someone must see your worth, and I will." The hall stood frozen in silence after Daniel's words. The human had defeated two guards with nothing but his fists, and still he stood tall, bruised but unbroken. The crowd that once laughed at his empty hands now whispered nervously. Their jeers had turned into uneasy murmurs, as if they feared something they could not name. The auctioneer's grin faltered for the first time, his staff lowering slightly. He studied Daniel as though seeing him with new eyes. This was not the performance he expected, not the weakness he wanted the crowd to enjoy. Something about the human unsettled him, something raw and untamed. Yet his pride forced him to sneer, his voice echoing across the chamber. You may have survived this test, human, but the bidding is not yet closed. The crowd stirred again, some eager to shout more offers, others hesitant. The nobles on the balconies leaned forward, their jeweled robes glittering as they whispered among themselves. They could not understand why a human, worthless, poor, fragile, would throw himself into chains for a slave. It broke their logic, their cruel order of things. And breaking order in this market was dangerous. Daniel ignored their stares, his gaze locked on the girl. She trembled, her chest rising fast, her silver-marked skin glowing brighter under the lights. Tears clung to her eyes, but they did not fall. Instead, she looked at him with something new, wonder. Her voice shook as she whispered again, her words barely reaching him through the noise. You would give everything for me? Daniel nodded slowly, his breath heavy, his body aching from the fight. Yes, he said, steady and sure, because no one else will. The girl's lips parted, but no sound came, only the shimmer of emotion in her eyes. For so long she had been a prize, a possession, a tool. Yet in this human's gaze, she saw no ownership, no greed, only truth. The auctioneer raised his staff again, striking it against the stage. Enough sentiment, he barked, his voice sharp. This is a market, not a temple. He turned to the crowd, forcing confidence back into his words. Will no one outbid the human? Will no treasure surpass a worthless life? For a long moment, the hall was quiet. The bidders who had shouted numbers before now hesitated. Their hands clutched their treasures tightly, but none raised them. The silence was heavy, broken only by the crackle of lamps above. The shock of Daniel's offer had cut deep, silencing even the greediest voices. The auctioneer's eyes darkened, frustration twisting his grin into a snarl. Then so be it, he growled. The girl's chains will break for the human's life. The guards moved, stepping forward to seize Daniel, their heavy steps shaking the floor. The crowd erupted with gasps and shouts, some cheering, some horrified. The human had won, but at the cost of his own freedom. The girl's chains rattled as she cried out, her voice breaking with fear. No, she screamed, her body straining against the iron that bound her wrists. The guards shoved her aside, dragging Daniel forward. They clamped cold iron around his arms, heavy and cruel. Still, he did not fight, his face calm, his eyes fixed on hers. She struggled harder, her voice trembling as she begged. Why would you do this? You do not even know me. Daniel smiled faintly, though his body ached. Because you deserve to be free, he said softly. The words struck her harder than any chain ever had. Her breath caught, her heart pounding with something she had not felt in years. Hope mixed with sorrow. Her eyes burned as she realized this human was truly giving everything, and it shattered something inside her. The guards forced Daniel to his knees, their claws pressing into his shoulders. The auctioneer lifted his staff high, his grin returning as he declared, "The human's life is forfeit, and the girl is free." The crowd roared, some in laughter, some in disbelief. The hall shook with the noise, yet within it, two figures stood bound by something stronger than chains. The girl stumbled forward as her shackles unlocked, her wrists raw and bleeding. She should have run, should have taken her freedom and fled. But her legs would not move away from him. She knelt beside Daniel, her trembling hand brushing against his arm. Tears spilled freely now, glimmering silver as they fell. "You are a fool," she whispered, her voice breaking, "but a fool braver than kings." Daniel's lips curved faintly, his voice low. "If bravery saves you, then it was worth it." The auctioneer sneered, slamming his staff once more. "Take him," he commanded, his voice echoing like thunder. The guards pulled Daniel to his feet, chains biting into his skin. The girl's cry echoed across the hall, her voice raw and filled with fire. "No," she screamed again, her body trembling. "You cannot take him." The crowd gasped, their shock growing deeper. The girl, once silent, now defied the market with her voice. Her silver lines glowed brighter, light spilling from her skin like fire under glass. The guards froze, sensing power in her that had been hidden until now. And in that single heartbeat, the hall knew something had shifted. Daniel met her gaze one last time, his voice calm despite the chains. "Your freedom was worth my life," he said, his words steady as stone. But the girl shook her head, her voice rising, fierce and unshakable. "Not if it costs you, not if it costs the one who saw me." The crowd erupted in chaos, their voices clashing, their fear growing. The auctioneer's grin faltered again as the girl's glow burned brighter. And in that moment, the market was no longer certain who had truly won. The hall boiled with chaos as the girl's glow brightened. Her silver lines burned like molten fire under her skin, lighting the stage in a strange and terrifying light. The crowd shouted in confusion, some crying for her to be controlled, others retreating in fear. Even the nobles on the balconies leaned back, their jeweled faces pale. This was no ordinary slave, and they realized it too late. Daniel, bound in chains, looked at her with steady eyes. He felt the pull of her power, the trembling air around her, but he did not flinch. She was free now, yet she did not run. Instead, she stood by him, her gaze fierce and burning. For the first time, she was not a captive, but something greater, someone choosing her path. The auctioneer slammed his staff against the stage, his voice cracking with fury. "Hold her down," he roared. "She is property. She belongs to the market." But his command carried less weight now. The guards hesitated, their weapons raised, but their bodies trembling under the heat of her silver glow. The girl took a step toward Daniel, her chains falling from her wrists like broken lies. Her voice rose above the crowd, strong and sharp. "No," she cried. "I belong to no one." Her words echoed like thunder, shaking the hall. The guards flinched, but still they advanced, their orders binding them tighter than fear. Daniel's chest tightened as he watched them move closer. He knew they would not stop, not until they had crushed him or dragged her back into chains. His breath came heavy, his bruised body aching from the earlier fight. Yet in his heart, there was no hesitation, no doubt. He had already chosen his path. He leaned closer to her, his voice low but firm. "You must run," he whispered, his chains rattling as he struggled against the guards. She shook her head fiercely, her glowing hair whipping around her face. "No, I will not leave you," she said, her voice trembling with both fury and fear. Daniel's eyes softened, though pain etched every line of his face. "You must, because if they take me, at least you will live." Her eyes filled with tears, silver and bright under the light. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Why? Why give yourself away for me?" Daniel closed his eyes for a breath, remembering the ashes of his world, the faces of those he had failed. When he opened them again, his voice was steady. "Because no one else will, and because your life deserves to shine." The guards yanked him forward, forcing him to his knees once more. The auctioneer raised his staff high, his grin sharp and cruel again. "The human's life is claimed," he declared, his voice shaking the chamber. "Let his sacrifice be the price for her freedom." The crowd erupted, half cheering, half in terror. Some shouted for Daniel's blood. Others cried out as the girl's glow flared brighter. She screamed, her voice splitting through the air. "You cannot take him." Her hands trembled, her power spilling like fire, but Daniel shook his head, his eyes locked on hers. "Yes," he whispered, calm and steady. "They can take me, but they cannot take what I gave you." The girl fell to her knees beside him, her glowing hand brushing his chains. Tears streamed down her face as she begged, "Please do not leave me, please." Daniel's heart ached at her words, but he forced himself to smile. "I am not leaving you," he said softly. "I am giving you a chance." The guards pulled at him again, dragging him backward. The auctioneer's voice boomed. "The bargain is struck, the human's life for her freedom." But the hall was no longer under his control. The girl's silver glow flared, blinding bright, her voice rising like a storm. "No," she cried, her body trembling. "I will not let this be the end." The crowd shielded their eyes, the guard stumbled. The auctioneer snarled, slamming his staff against the stage again. But the light only grew stronger, spilling across the hall, filling every shadow. And in that storm of light, Daniel's calm voice still carried. "If my life must end for yours to begin, then let it be so." The girl's cry tore through the air, raw and desperate. Her power surged, silver fire crackling around her, wrapping both of them in its glow. The crowd screamed, fleeing in panic as the light consumed the stage. The auctioneer's staff snapped in two, his voice drowned out by the storm. The guards staggered back, their armor burning under the heat. Daniel closed his eyes, the weight of his choice heavy but unshakable. He had nothing in his hands, yet he had given everything. And in that sacrifice, in that final act, he found peace. The girl's arms wrapped around him as her glow reached its peak. Her voice broke as she whispered, "No, not like this, not for me." The light exploded outward, filling the hall with a blinding storm of silver fire. And in that blaze, the fate of both human and captive shifted forever. The storm of silver light tore through the market like a rising sun. Walls shook, banners burned, and the alien crowd scattered in fear. The nobles who once mocked from their balconies now fled, their jewels clattering across the floor. The guards staggered back, their armor glowing hot under the flood of energy, their weapons useless against the tide. At the center of it all stood the girl, her chains shattered, her silver-marked skin blazing brighter with every heartbeat. Her power surged like a river that had been held too long behind walls, breaking free at last. She held Daniel close, his body weak in her arms, his chains still clamped around him. Her tears fell onto his face, glowing drops that burned like fire against steel. "Do not leave me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I am not free without you." Daniel's eyes flickered open, heavy but steady. He looked at her through the storm of light, and a faint smile touched his lips. "You are stronger than you know," he murmured, his voice barely a breath. Her heart clenched, the storm inside her pulsing with his words. For so long she had been told she was nothing but a weapon, nothing but a prize. But he, a human with empty hands, had seen her worth before she had seen it herself. The auctioneer, furious and desperate, stumbled forward, half blinded by the glow. "This cannot be," he roared, his voice broken. "She is mine. The human is mine." His broken staff crackled with failing energy, sparks flying into the air. He raised it as if to strike, but the girl turned her blazing gaze on him. Her voice thundered like a storm, shaking the very walls. "I belong to no one," she cried, "and neither does he." The air split with silver fire, striking the staff from his hands. The auctioneer screamed as the blast hurled him across the hall, crashing into the walls with a sickening crack. The crowd screamed and scattered, panic consuming them. The market that had been a fortress of power collapsed into chaos. And through it all, the girl's glow burned brighter, unstoppable. She turned back to Daniel, her voice breaking. "You gave yourself for me, but I will not let you fall." Her hands pressed against his chains, her power flowing into them. Metal hissed and melted under her touch, dripping to the floor like water. The shackles that bound him shattered, falling away in glowing fragments. Daniel gasped, his chest rising as if he could breathe again for the first time. The girl's arms steadied him, her silver glow wrapping him like a shield. "You are free now," she whispered, her tears falling like stars. Daniel's voice was weak, but his smile was steady. "No," he said, his eyes locked on hers. "You freed me long before these chains broke." The girl trembled at his words, her heart shaking. For the first time, she realized his sacrifice had not only given her freedom, it had given her strength. The storm around them slowly softened, the silver glow dimming to a steady light. The hall lay in ruins, the market broken, its power undone. Those who had mocked and laughed at the humans' empty hands were gone, their pride shattered. Daniel stood with her, still weak but unbroken. Their hands touched, her glow spreading into his skin, and together they faced the silence left behind. He had offered his life to save her, but in the end, it was his gift that awakened hers. Without him, she might have remained a prisoner forever. With him, she became something more, herself, unchained, unowned, unstoppable. She looked at him, her voice soft but filled with fire. "Your life was never lost," she whispered. "It is mine to protect now." Daniel's tired smile deepened, his empty hands rising to hold hers. "Then we protect each other," he said, his voice carrying like a promise. Together, they walked through the ruins of the hall, their steps steady. The crowd that had once laughed at him would tell stories of this night for years. The story of a human who had nothing, yet gave everything. The story of a girl once bound in chains, who rose like fire to claim her freedom. And the story of two lives, bound not by gold or power, but by sacrifice and truth. As the market crumbled behind them, the stars awaited ahead. For the first time, the human's hands are not empty. They held hers, glowing silver in the darkness. And in that light, a new beginning was born.